You got to operate in truth, right? Operate in truth. Tell the truth.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Gator Truth Florida Football Podcast. I'm Daniel, and on this episode, we're going to take a look at the Gators' 42-20 loss to the Georgia Bulldogs this past Saturday in Jacksonville. Of course, the game is a tale of two halves. The first half was a maddening display of both poor offense and poor defense, while the second half, we at least had one quarter where we looked really good on both sides of the ball. Without any more delay, let's take a look at the offense. I would grade Anthony Richardson's performance at the quarterback position as a C+. He did have accuracy issues throughout the game, finishing with less than 60% accuracy. Now, some of that was due to throwaways, some of that was due to an immense amount of pressure put on him by the Bulldogs front seven, and plenty of blitzing there, and sometimes where our running backs did not pick up blitzes. However, where some of those things could be excused, there are also things that could not. One of the big ones to me was definitely his miss of Burke, where Burke gets behind the defense and he completely overthrows them. He also had a miss on Justin Shorter in the end zone. There were also a number of other plays he could have had, but did not make a great throw. There are also some plays where, honestly, maybe we should have gotten pass interference calls, like when he jacked it 50 yards down the field to Justin Shorter. Shorter had actually stopped running sort of on the play at a point and then realized the ball was in the air. Made a good effort for it. I do believe the Georgia defender got there early, but is what it is. And that's what I have to say about the officiating before we get too far. It was what it was. It was not great, but there are things that happen. Speaking of officiating, the long pass to Pearsall probably was on target. And what I mean by that is, and I don't think it was pass interference, but Pearsall actually slows down thinking the ball's coming up short, which we've seen Anthony Richardson throw short in the pass to Pearsall. And one way you can tell is when the contact did happen with Pearsall, it almost has a contact with Pearsall's chest because he's turned around expecting that. He's slowed down thinking it. But had he looked over his shoulder and continued with his pace down the field, I believe he catches that ball and there wouldn't be contact. At that point, I had moved. If you saw on Twitter, I was right behind the goalpost for the first half, and then some family had moved around and there was empty seats over in the corner. So we all moved to sit together as a group. And at that point, I was just on the other sideline from when this happened. And as the ball's in the air, I said, oh crap, Pearsall slowed down. And then he picks up the speed a little bit. Again, you can tell that. So that's not one I'm going to knock Richardson for, but there were plenty, like I said, to knock him for, such as the Burke miss when he missed Shorter in the end zone, which leads me to a little bit of an explanation moment. I saw some people on Twitter saying, well, the check down was wide open, and it became wide open when Richardson about threw the pass to Shorter. If you look, the guy who came through almost got it. I believe it was Ringo, number 5. He actually had gone out with that check down, and Richardson had read Shorter open. When a quarterback is going through their progressions, they go, is progression 1 there? No. Okay. Progression 2 there? No. Progression 3, so on and so forth. They don't read 1, then look to 2, then look to 3, then decide where to throw. So if someone in his earlier progressions he reads as open, which he did with Shorter, he's not going to look at a check down, because if you do that, you're going to delay your routes and possibly have the problem of someone running themselves into coverage where they were open earlier. With that said, on that check down, it did get open, but again, it's easy to see where the check down was when the ball was released or after it was released versus where it was when I watched the replay, which was Ringo's on him and adjusts to where the ball's being thrown, runs back to go and try and make a play. If that were accurate, and especially if Ringo doesn't drop back, we ended up getting a field goal on that drive. So it was a 4-point loss on that miss. However, just things to work on. And I'd say overall, he also did decently well in the running department. Not that he put up many yards. I mean, he didn't get tons of yards rushing, but there were a few times he did get us first downs with his legs. Obviously, there were some sacks that he took, but he also sometimes with his legs was able to get to a point to throw away where other quarterbacks would be sacked for a loss. There was one time where he got an intentional grounding, but that's something I can live with because you're going to have 2nd and 23 there, whether it's a sack or an intentional grounding. At least with that intentional grounding, when he was forced out of the pocket and threw it, he took a chance of getting it past the line of scrimmage. And had he gotten it past the line of scrimmage, then he just saved us 13 yards. So that one I'm not going to really kill him for. I know some people were upset when he threw it on out of bounds on 4th down in the second half when we had a 4th and 6 from midfield after Georgia had responded with a touchdown when we had cut the lead to 8. Rewatching the play, no one's open. I understand the want to throw it up and hope something good happens, but at midfield, his choices are take a sack and give Georgia a better position for it, or throw it where they could potentially pick it, get a big return, or throw it out of bounds. Unfortunately, he took that choice, throw it out of bounds. I can't really kill him for that play because there's no play there. So it was probably the least risky to give the best result, although maybe you would want him to throw a 50-50 ball. The problem is, unlike later on when he threw a 50-50 ball in the end zone in a similar situation and Pearsall just didn't come down with it, and Georgia initially was given an interception but didn't. Unlike that, where they're down the field and it's whatever, the routes on his side for when he threw it out of bounds on that 4th and 6 were completely covered, and they're only about 5 yards down the field, maybe 6, 7, because they're around the sticks, and it was 2 guys with a guy right on them. That's how you get a pick going the other way. I understand why it happened. I'm not saying I like it, but I understand, and it is a completely different situation than, okay, throw it deep and hope someone comes up with it. Again, give them a C+. Moving on to the offensive line. The offensive line for me ends up with a C. They gave up lots of pressure on Richardson throughout the day. And there's very little running room. And as you know, I'm going to give the line a lot of flack when we don't have too much running. We didn't do well in the first half. I think we ended up with less than 20 rushing yards in the half. We can say some of that is sacks, but only 6 yards were lost due to sacks, or only -6 yards for Anthony Richardson in that first half. So sacks weren't the biggest deal for why we were not running so well in the first half. Moving on to the running backs, I would give them a C as well. They were not great in the game. Obviously, some of that is the offensive line. Some of it is them, like I saw in one play on the replay, them running into the back of the linemen, where if they just went a step or two to their left, they had some room to get a few yards. And also, there were plenty of missed blocks or block opportunities when they're helping out in the backfield with blocking. Trevor Etienne led the way. He averaged over 4 yards per carry, the only back who did. However, if you took away his one longest run, he averaged 3.9 yards per carry. Montrell Johnson definitely has not had a good few weeks. He averaged less than 3 yards per carry in this game, and it goes down to 1.3 yards per carry if you take away his longest run. And the reason why I'd take away the longest runs just to look at that is to see how effective players were beyond just one play. And obviously, if you get 11 carries, sure, you get one good run, but if you're running for 1.3 yards per carry on 10 other runs, like Montrell Johnson did, then those are 10 plays on average that we totally lost and got behind on. Again, that's not all on the running backs. It's definitely on our offensive line not doing their job. And I remember saying one of our keys was to establish the run. Now, I believe Carter would not be playing for Georgia based on the things that had been put out there. However, he did play and he was very effective, and we did not deal with Georgia's front seven as well as we could have, in my opinion. They are talented. We have some talent on the front end too to do better than 1.3 yards per carry with Montrell Johnson. On the tight ends, I'm going to give a C plus. They really didn't do much in the passing game. Some of that is because they weren't asked to do too much in the passing game. I mean, Zip had a ball thrown to him that he did not catch. Some of that was a low throw, but also at Florida at some points, you've got to make some difficult catches, as I've said for weeks. And then also with our running game, they are a crucial part of our run blocking. And with that, that's why I've got to give them the grade that I do. There's really not much more to say. I did see today that Zipper's out for the year. And one thing I'll be curious about with Zip out for the year is if we try and put in Xander's more, which I think we will, but with 12 personnel, are we going to be putting a guy who's not played much in there? Or are we going to see more 11 personnel and less 12 personnel, meaning one tight end, one running back, and 3 receivers? I think we'd be better with more 11 personnel, but who knows? We'll see as the season goes on what happens these last 4 games. For the wide receivers, I am giving them a B, the highest grade I will give an offensive unit, because for what they're asked to do, they did a pretty good job. In fact, on one of our longer runs of the evening, Justin Shorter was right there pushing his guy back to allow us to get over 10 yards on that carry. Also, it wasn't like we saw a ton of drops by these guys, which I do want to go back to something real quick. Of course, I'm talking about the zip throw on the first drive. I'm not talking about when the ball was thrown over his head as far as one that he should have had. But anyways, for the receivers, overall, I thought they did what they're asked to do. However, things like Pearsall slowing down on that one play and a few other things, it's more of a, you get a B because you didn't do anything spectacular. I mean, I get it. Xavier Henderson had that nice 78-yard touchdown catch, but when you're that wide open, it's not like you made 3 guys miss. Georgia busted the coverage. We actually hit it for once and we made it. So great play by him, but that's not something I'm going to just say, wow, they really dragged us up. There are many times guys did not get open, like I talked about the 4th and 6 earlier, and there are plenty of times where there are just issues or misblocking assignments on certain plays, like when we did the pitch to Ricky early to the outside. So overall, that's why I'm giving the receivers a B. And now let's take a look at the defense. For the defensive line, I'm giving them a C. There are times that they got pushed around, obviously. There are times they didn't get pressure on Bennett. And that was something that we just couldn't have. But one thing I will say, we did contain for the most part. I didn't see Stetson Bennett getting around to the outside, breaking any long runs. So I do need to acknowledge the good with the bad. The good is they didn't let Stetson Bennett beat us with his legs. The problem is we let him beat us with his arm, and some of that was bad coverage by us. Some of it a little bit of bad luck. And then some of it just is what it is with this defense this year. The linebackers, I'm actually going to give the linebackers a B, and it's not because of Ventrell Miller this time. It is because of Amari Burney. Amari Burney has been much aligned by myself and others because he has had lots of bad misses this year. However, he's one player I can point to and say he has improved throughout the season, at least on this defense, and had his biggest game of the season, quite frankly, against Georgia. He had some nice coverage on the first drive. He knocked down a ball on the 3rd down, which granted, had he turned around, he could have had a pick there. Then he did have nice coverage on Brock Bowers on the long touchdown throw for Georgia. Goes to bat it down. Unlucky goes to Brock Bowers. However, as a member of my party said, and I do agree with it, or maybe I saw on Twitter, is, yeah, we can call it unlucky, but it's also not unlucky when he could have just turned around and picked the ball off. So that is a second interception he should have had in the first 3-4 drives of the game. Like I said before the game, Stetson Bennett will give you gifts if you just play smart. And that's one thing I want to say. We did play smart, had lots of good man coverage. And it's easy to say, well, maybe this was on. No, he was isolated on Brock Bowers. I don't think that we had Amari Burney being the deep man for that side of the field from the linebacker position. And he turned around, went to bat it. I'd prefer him turn around and try and make the pick, but it's better than him not turning around on the first one. And we're going to get to, of course, later on, he's in good coverage, and he does turn around, get his eyes on where the ball is, makes a play on the ball, gets the good pick. So you even saw progression in that game, or in the game on that from Burney. Also, the great strip on Georgia's first drive of the third quarter. So he's probably my defensive MVP of the game. Did he have a head scratcher or two? Yeah, but even in the NFL, you have players that have head scratchers or two in a game. So with that said, Amari Burney is the reason why I'm raising the linebackers to a B. Moving on to the corners, and by corners in this sense, I'm not going to be talking about the nickelback position because I've got a whole nother feeling on that. But when we're talking about the outside corners, I'm going to give them a B plus. Overall, they did not do much to the outside, beat our outside guys without some help from the officials. I mean, Jason Marshall gave up 2 big plays. Well, one was a penalty on him. The other, well, both were called penalties on him. One was a completion, one wasn't. One should have been offensive pass interference, got called on him. The other one, I have not seen a piece of the tape yet that shows there's defensive holding or anything close to it. And like I've said before, Jason Marshall, you put him in man, he's got to make you hit tight windows. And in those situations, he made the tight windows. They didn't complete they wouldn't have completed either of those plays if not for McConkey shoving him. And of course, why that was called on Marshall, I don't know. But again, good plays by him. He also had a play as well where the guy had to make a leaping one-handed attempt at a catch. And with that one-handed attempt at a catch, he didn't catch it. And that would have had to been the perfect catch or perfect throw and ridiculous catch. And they just did not pull it off. Did he make some mistakes? Yes. But did he do lots of great things? Yes. And he also was the victim of 2 terrible calls by the officiating crew. There's not any times where I really was like, oh my gosh, this is terrible from Jaden Hill, where he gave up something. Same thing with Helm or any other, or Kember, who I saw in the game, or any of the corners. So if my B is about here's what my average is, the corners get a B plus because they really took care of the outside quite a bit. Again, was it perfect? No, that's why they're not an A, but they did do really well. The nickelback position. Early on, I noticed it a lot with Trevez Johnson there. I've tried to not go around saying his name too much because it just gets negative. I don't like being too negative about the players. But early on, there was a sequence where Trevez Johnson gave up back-to-back plays. They knew if we had Brock Bowers matched up against him, we're winning it every time. And they did. They really ran it back-to-back plays against them. And they did again. It's not just because Bowers is a freak. It's because they saw their tape and they knew this is a matchup we can't abuse. And they did. Fast forward, right as I'm tweeting that Perkins was substituted in for Johnson, I tweet that out right as the ball's getting snapped and Perkins makes a ridiculous play. I didn't see Perkins giving up too many yards after that throughout the game. So overall, the nickel position, I'd give it either a C plus or B minus. Definitely a rough start. However, I stopped noticing the nickel position, which is probably a good sign. Not saying we didn't give up 300 yards. However, when we look at least 100 of that 300 were that tip pass on Burney, and then a good chunk of that. I think it was 27, close to 30 yards on what was called the pass interference on Jason Marshall. Then we look and say, okay, how much did we really give up outside of that? Around 200. Again, could be better. And then when you take into account the first few drives, how they're moving it, how they had some big throws on Johnson, that's why I'm able to, or why I'm coming in and giving a little bit slight nod up. The safety position, I'm giving a C. If it weren't for Torrance leading the team in tackling, it would probably be lower. Neither of the safeties were really that great in this game. I mean, Dean did have a play or two, but he also had a play or two where I was shaking my head wondering, what are we doing? With all that said, the defense did force 3 turnovers. They did get a stop or two without a turnover. And really, that's what we asked them to do against Georgia. And then the offense did not live up to their side of the bargain, at least in the first half. For coaching, I do want to point out Patrick Toney, much maligned, some of it with reason, some of it without. We did see some adjustments in this game. We saw some personnel changes. We saw some blitzing. We definitely saw some man. There was a lot of good things about this defense that we can point to and say, okay, there was some change, some better. It wasn't great that we gave up a ton of yards in the first quarter or that we gave up something like 300 yards in the first half. But then you see the second half where we see multiple turnovers. Unfortunately, the defense didn't stand their ground when we got it within 1 score. And obviously, that's not a great thing, but there were things to at least point to and say, okay, this was a better defensive performance than we thought it would be. Now, there is something to be asked for about the offense in this game. And it's easy to say, well, it's talent, it's AR missing receivers. Although those things are true, there's also times where, again, you have 2 receivers on vertical routes against 5 very talented Georgia defenders. That's not going to win too many times. Also, having a receiver check down over in the screen area, that's not going to win too many times. We threw it once or twice, and I know we got a decent loss on at least one of those. There are things that can be better with this offense, and obviously at times it could have been better by us hitting receivers, but there are times that design wasn't working, and there are times that maybe running up the middle was not the call. And also, 3rd and long, at least 4 times, we decided we're going to run the ball. I know some people are saying, well, that makes sense because we're going to try and make it a more manageable 4th down. Well, my mindset should be, how can we get a 1st down on 3rd down? That's what I think the mindset should be. And then falling back to using 4th down if we need it, not when we're rushing for like 2 yards per carry at that point, running the ball and hoping something happens, because there's a few times we got a loss or no gain. So it really did not help us. I don't understand the mindset. In fact, on a few of those where we ran on 3rd and long, we didn't go for it on 4th down. Maybe the hope was they would get us close enough, but then again, so would a short pass. That's another thing I want to bring up. There's not too many quick passes in this offense. There's a lot of slow developing routes. There's a lot of other things, including play action that slows down the process. And the reason why I bring that up is Georgia did blitz. And they blitzed a bit on obvious passing downs. And there aren't really anything that goes quickly that we can quickly throw the ball in. I know we've not been too successful on quick slants, but there might be something to throw it where the blitz came from. And we didn't see too much of that. And that's something I'd like to see more from this offense and from coaching. And the last thing, and I think this did make an impact on the game at least a bit, is at the end of the first half, we get the ball back inside our 20. Billy Napier, for some reason, thinks he's going to run the clock out in the shadow of our own goalpost and runs the ball very conservatively. Of course, Georgia takes timeouts. And when Georgia takes timeouts, they get the ball back, end up scoring. So instead of 21-3, or maybe if we tried to move the ball with the 2 timeouts we had, and let's say we get a field goal, 21-6 difference. Instead, it's 28-3 at half. because we run two conservative plays. Georgia takes a timeout. Unfortunately, AR does step out of bounds. That is a knock on him. Should have at least gone down inbounds to force them to use another timeout, although Georgia, I don't believe, would have needed it based on the way things went. But let's just say it's 21-3. Nothing happens. We get a first down or two, causing Georgia to not be able to score. We don't score either. 21-3 at half. If what follows is that 17-0 run that we get in the third quarter, that's a 21-20 game. Although I'm betting if it was 21-19, we go for two. And so it's either 21-19 or 21-21. So although it seems like an insignificant, well, he was trying to run out the clock or force Georgia to use timeout, even though that may seem insignificant, or, well, they may not have scored without that phantom pass interference call on Marshall. I understand some of that, but again, clock management. We've had this conversation in previous games, and now it's popping its head up again. There are things like this that I'd like to see do better and fully thought through, because it can make a difference. Now, is Georgia more talented? Would they probably have won? Did we expect Georgia to win? Yes. However, things like that are things that do bury us in a bigger hole where it could be closer. Maybe that changes mindsets on both teams. And maybe that mindset causes Stetson Bennett to push more and he throws more picks. Who knows? But when we go to 28-3, and maybe they did lose focus some to allow us to get somewhat back in that game. So maybe it was a good thing. But the point is, we can't be trying to run a clock out when the other team has 3 timeouts and we're in the shadow of our own goalpost. So I still have questions about that and some of the other things. But with that said, what I've said throughout Twitter since Saturday night is, let's not worry about, oh, we need to change this corner or that corner. No, let's wait to see what next year looks like on offense and on defense. And it's still the way it is, then let's talk change of coordinators, talk change of scheme. But until we get into that year 2, where lots of teams at all sorts of levels do see year 2 bumps, once we see if there is a year 2 bump, if it's big or if it's just a small thing, then we can fully make that decision. Right now, I think it is premature, but you do have my word that if I think it becomes necessary, I'm not going to dance around. I'm going to say that a change needs to be made. And if there are small changes I do think to need to be made, like right now I'm talking about clock management or only 2 vertical routes, or, on defense, we need to see personnel changes, or we need to see, a little bit more man. I'm going to see those little adjustments. That doesn't mean throughout the entire defense or coordinator, but there are things we can do to help our team. And I will say those. And if I think our student athletes are best served by a change at this coaching position or that coaching position, I'm going to be honest with you about that. Doesn't mean you have to agree, but I'm going to tell you, here's what I believe, and here's why, as hopefully I have done with here's why I believe we can win X amount of games, or why I think our defense should be better, and then it wasn't. And do I think that we have done less than we could have done? Yeah. Do I think that means we should throw it out now? No. Same thing with the offense. There are things that we've done well. We are a top 5 yards per play team, or at least we're going into the game. So there are obviously things that are working, but then there are times where we have a Montrell Johnson running for less than 3 yards per carry, which reminds me of one more thing. In that situation where we're having problems sometimes with pass rush, and Montrell is pretty good with picking up the pass rush, I do believe Lorenzo Lingard does need a little bit more time because he is decent with carries. He actually had 1 carry for 4 yards. But Naquan Wright was great in pass protection. That may be a time where it's like, okay, if we're trying to throw because we can't run, let's put in Wright because he gives us a receiving threat and also is better at picking up the pass blocking than probably any other running back. And truth be told, there are times we probably need to see that, but who knows? We've got 4 games left. We're only 66% way through the season. We are facing probably the weakest stretch of our schedule, which is this 3-5 A&M team, a so-so Carolina team at home, away at Vandy, and away at an FSU team that I do expect to be bowl eligible by the time we face them, because I don't think Louisiana's going to be beating them. So with that said, thank you everyone for listening. And as always, go Gators.